If someone had told me a year ago that my life would be completely upended by a man I actively despised at the dog park, I would have laughed. Not a real laugh, but the tight, anxious sound I reserve for social situations I didn't understand. My life was a carefully curated collection of quiet routines. Me, my timid rescue dog Buster, my small apartment that smelled of old books and brewing tea. It was safe. It was contained. It was lonely, but I called it peace. The dog park was our one necessary concession to the outside world. An acre of fenced-in grass and dirt where Buster could, on his good days, remember he was a dog. And it was where I saw him. Him, Julian. He was impossible to miss. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a thunderous laugh that always seemed to startle the birds from the trees. He moved with an easy, unthinking confidence that felt like a personal affront to my own tightly wound existence. Everything about him was big. His voice, his presence, his dog. His dog was a Great Dane named Zeus, a boisterous, goofy giant who galloped through the park like a clumsy prince, utterly unaware of the chaos he left in his wake. He'd bound up to my perpetually nervous terrier mix, and Buster would immediately tuck his tail and hide behind my legs, trembling. And Julian would just laugh that booming laugh. He just wants to play, he'd call across the field, his voice rich and unconcerned. I hated that. Hated the casual dismissal of my dog's terror. Hated the assumption that everyone, dog and human alike, should operate on his level of loud, joyful confidence. In my mind, I cataloged his offenses. He was arrogant. He was careless. He was the kind of person who never had to second-guess a single moment in his life, and I, a connoisseur of second, third, and fourth guesses, resented him for it. Our interactions were minimal, clipped sentences exchanged over the fence or when our leashes tangled. My words were always tight with a politeness I didn't feel. His were always breezy, as if he didn't notice the wall of ice I had built between us. Or worse, as if he noticed and found it amusing. So we existed in this strange orbit. Two men at opposite ends of a dog park, tethered to this patch of green by our animals, living in completely different worlds. Mine was small and quiet and safe. His, I assumed, was loud and bright and full of people. I watched him from my corner, my arms crossed over my chest, a silent judge presiding over a court of my own anxieties. I observed the way other owners gravitated toward him, the easy way he smiled, the casual strength in his hands when he tossed a ball for Zeus. I told myself it was disdain, a simple, uncomplicated dislike for a man who represented everything I wasn't. It was a much safer feeling than the quiet, traitorous hum of fascination that vibrated just beneath the surface. It was easier to hate his confidence than to admit I envied it. It was easier to resent his dog's joy than to wish my own could be so free. This was my routine. This was my status quo. A carefully balanced ecosystem of solitude and silent judgment. And I thought it would last forever. Then came the storm. It wasn't supposed to rain. The forecast had promised a perfect, cloudless autumn afternoon. The sky was a brilliant, sharp blue when Buster and I arrived. Julian and Zeus were already there, holding court in the center of the field. I steered Buster to our usual spot near the water fountain, a safe distance away, and settled onto the bench, pulling out a book I had no intention of reading. The air changed first. A sudden drop in temperature, a prickle on the skin. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of ozone and damp earth. I glanced up. The brilliant blue sky was gone, swallowed by a bruised, purple-gray mass of clouds rolling in from the west with an unnatural speed. It was a predatory sky. A low rumble echoed in the distance. Buster, who hated loud noises more than anything, flattened himself against my leg, whining. Other owners started gathering their things, clipping on leashes, their voices carrying on the wind. "Looks like a bad one," someone said. I fumbled for Buster's leash, my fingers suddenly clumsy. The park was large, and we were on the far side, a long walk from the gate and the safety of my car. The first drop of rain hit my cheek, cold and heavy. Then another. Then the sky opened up. It wasn't rain, it was a deluge. A solid sheet of water that soaked through my jacket in seconds, plastering my hair to my scalp. The world dissolved into a gray blur. Thunder cracked directly overhead, a violent, splitting sound, and the lights in the nearby parking lot flickered and died. Buster yelped, a sound of pure panic, and tried to bolt. I lunged for him, my feet slipping in the newly formed mud. "Hey, over here!" The voice cut through the roar of the storm. It was Julian's. He was waving, pointing toward a small, squat building near the edge of the woods that I'd barely ever noticed. A groundskeeper's shed. He had Zeus by the collar, the massive dog looking uncharacteristically subdued, his ears pinned back. There was no other choice. My car was an impossible distance away. I scooped a frantic, shivering Buster into my arms and ran, my sneakers sinking into the sodden grass. The shed door was already open when I reached it, Julian holding it against the force of the wind. I stumbled inside, into the sudden, shocking dark. He slammed the door shut behind us, plunging us into near-total blackness. The roar of the storm was instantly muted, replaced by the frantic drumming of rain on the tin roof and the sound of our own ragged breaths. We were trapped, together. The air in the shed was thick, heavy with the smell of damp earth, potting soil, and something metallic like old tools. It was a small space, impossibly small. I could feel the heat radiating from Julian's body, could hear the soft panting of his dog next to mine. My own heart was a frantic, trapped bird against my ribs. A flash of lightning illuminated the space for a split second, a stark, black and white photograph. Shelves cluttered with terracotta pots, a wheelbarrow leaning against the wall. And Julian, his face pale, his dark hair slicked to his forehead, his eyes wide as he looked at me. Then darkness again. "You okay?" His voice was low, stripped of its usual booming confidence. It was just a voice in the dark. "Fine," I managed to say, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. I was clutching Buster so tightly he squirmed in my arms. I loosened my grip, setting him on the dry, concrete floor. He immediately crawled under a low shelf, a shivering ball of fur. Another crack of thunder, louder this time, shook the small building. I flinched. Beside me, I heard a soft whine. It wasn't Buster. "Easy, boy," Julian murmured. I could hear him stroking Zeus, the soft rasp of his hand against the dog's short coat. The Great Dane, the fearless prince of the park, was scared. This was a new detail, an unexpected crack in the facade. The man whose dog was always so perfectly, annoyingly confident, was now comforting his trembling animal in the dark. I started to shiver, the cold from my wet clothes seeping in my bones. My teeth chattered. I tried to stifle it, wrapping my arms around myself, but it was an involuntary reflex. Here, I felt a movement beside me. Then something heavy and surprisingly warm settled over my shoulders. It was his jacket. It smelled of him, that clean, outdoor scent mixed with rain and something uniquely his own. It was an anchor in the disorienting darkness. "I'm fine," I said, a reflexive, stupid protest. "You're shaking," he stated, a simple fact with no room for argument. "Just take it." I pulled the jacket tighter around me, the warmth a guilty comfort. We stood in silence for a long time, the only sounds the storm outside and the soft whimpers of our dogs. The darkness changed things. Without the visual cues of his confident posture or my own defensive stance, we were just two people, two voices. I found myself studying him in the intermittent flashes of lightning. I saw things I'd never noticed from across a field. A faint, silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow. The lines of exhaustion etched around his eyes. His hands, which I'd always seen as effortlessly strong, were clenched at his sides, the knuckles white. He wasn't the unflappable monolith I had built in my head. He was just a man, trapped in a storm, worried about his dog. The thunder boomed again, a deep, rattling concussion that felt like it was right on top of us. Buster let out a sharp cry of terror and scrambled out from under the shelf, scrabbling at the door, desperate to escape. "Buster, no." I lunged for him, but he was slick with rain and pure panic. He dodged my grasp. I got him. Julian moved with a speed that surprised me. He knelt, blocking Buster's path, not grabbing him, but just creating a gentle barrier with his body. He didn't speak to the dog. He just put his hand out, palm down on the floor. Buster, still trembling, stopped his frantic scratching and tentatively sniffed Julian's fingers. I knelt down too, my knee brushing against his. The contact was a sudden, intense jolt of heat that shot up my leg and made my breath catch in my throat. I froze. He didn't pull away. That small point of contact became the entire focus of my universe. My skin hummed. "Sorry," I whispered, though I didn't move. "Don't be," he said, his voice quiet, almost a rumble. He was still focused on Buster, who was now cautiously licking his hand. I watched his fingers, long and calloused, as they gently stroked Buster's head. My dog, who shrank from strangers, was leaning into his touch. I reached out to soothe Buster as well, and my hand brushed against his. Another jolt. This time our fingers grazed skin against skin. It was nothing. It was everything. A current passed between us, a silent, shocking communication in the dark. My stomach felt like it was full of bees. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned, my heart hammering against my ribs. Did he feel it? He must have. He cleared his throat, but still, he didn't move his knee away from mine. The storm raged on, but the storm inside me was wilder. The carefully constructed walls of my disdain were crumbling, washed away by the rain and this unexpected proximity. The man I had disliked for months was kneeling beside me in the dark, his knee pressed against mine, his scent enveloping me, his kindness calming my terrified dog. The power dynamic had been obliterated. He wasn't the king of the park, and I wasn't the anxious hermit in the corner. We were just two men. "How do you keep him so calm?" he asked, his voice low. The question was so unexpected it took me a moment to process. He was asking me for advice. Zeus is usually fearless, but he hates thunder. I never know what to do. It was an admission of vulnerability, a request for help. It leveled everything. I stammered, trying to gather my thoughts, my mind still reeling from the touch of his hand. I just try to act like it's no big deal. A calm voice. Slow movements. They feed off our energy, you know? Feed off our energy, he repeated softly, as if testing the words. Right. He shifted his attention to Zeus, who was panting heavily, his large body trembling. Julian started murmuring to him, his voice a low, soothing cadence. He was putting my advice into practice, and it was working. Zeus's panting slowly subsided, and he rested his massive head on Julian's thigh. The simple act of him taking my advice, of trusting my knowledge, felt more intimate than the accidental touch. It was a bridge built between two islands. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't empty or awkward anymore. It was filled with a new, unspoken awareness. The space between us felt charged, humming with a tension that had nothing to do with the storm. The rain began to soften, the drumming on the roof easing into a steady, hypnotic patter. The thunder retreated, rumbling its displeasure in the distance. The world outside was slowly coming back into focus. I felt a strange sense of loss. I wasn't ready for the darkness to end. In the dark, things were simpler, braver. "I see you here all the time," Julian said, his voice startling me out of my thoughts. "With your book." My face flushed, though I knew he couldn't see it. "Yeah, Buster needs the exercise. You never really talked to anyone." It wasn't an accusation. It was just an observation. A neutral fact. Not much of a talker. I guess my standard defense. He was quiet for a moment. "I thought you didn't like me," he said, his voice so low I almost missed it. The confession hung in the air, shockingly direct. My heart leaped into my throat. Honesty. He was offering honesty. Could I meet it? I thought you were arrogant. I admitted, my own voice barely a whisper. The words felt like a betrayal of my own carefully guarded secrets. I expected him to laugh, that booming laugh, to be offended. Instead, he just let out a soft sigh. "Yeah," he said. "I get that a lot," another crack in the facade. He knew how he came across. Maybe it was a defense mechanism, just like my silence. It's just he started then stopped. He took a breath. It's easier to be loud. Fills up the space, you know? People don't ask as many questions if you're always laughing. I knew exactly what he meant. My silence served the same purpose. It was a shield. We had built our forts at opposite ends of the same battlefield. I moved here about a year and a half ago, he continued, his voice soft and confessional in the enclosed space. Don't know many people. Got Zeus for the company. Figured the dog park will be a good way to, I don't know, not be so alone. The word hung in the air between us. Alone. It was a word I knew intimately. It was the architect of my life. And here he was, this man I saw as the epitome of social success, admitting to the same feeling. My carefully constructed image of him shattered into a million pieces. He wasn't a king. He was just lonely, like me. I get it, I said, and the words were the truest I'd spoken all year. My apartment gets quiet. He turned his head toward me in the gloom. I couldn't see his expression, but I could feel his gaze. The air grew thick, charged with everything unsaid. The small space of the shed seemed to shrink, pulling us closer until I could feel the warmth of his breath on my cheek. My own breath hitched. This was it, a precipice, a moment suspended in time, outside the rules of the bright, loud world. He leaned in, slowly, hesitantly. It was a question, not a demand. His movements were so deliberate, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to break the spell. My mind screamed at me to retreat, to go back to the safety of my solitude, go back to being the man who judges from a distance. But my body wouldn't obey. I was frozen, held captive by the possibility of what might happen next. His lips brushed against mine. It was impossibly soft. Tentative, just a ghost of a touch. He paused, his lips still hovering a millimeter from my own, waiting. It was my choice, my move. And in that moment, for the first time in a long time, I chose not to be afraid. I closed the distance. The kiss was not frantic or passionate. It was quiet, searching, and deeply, achingly honest. It tasted of rain and earth and a loneliness I recognized as my own. His lips were soft, questioning. His hand came up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek, and the callous skin was a startling, grounding reality. I leaned into his touch, my own hands finding their way to his chest, feeling the steady, rapid beat of his heart beneath my palm. It was beating as fast as mine. He wasn't a confident monolith. He was nervous. He was just as terrified and hopeful as I was. We broke apart slowly, the sound of our breathing loud in the quiet shed. The rain had stopped. A sliver of watery sunlight seeped through a crack in the door, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The world was returning. He didn't let go of my face. His thumb continued its gentle stroking. His dark eyes, no longer guarded, searched mine. What was he looking for? What did he see? Leo, I said, my name a raw sound in the sudden quiet. I hadn't even realized he didn't know it. Julian, he replied, his voice thick. We stayed like that for a moment longer, caught in the fragile bubble of our new reality. Then, the spell was broken by the sound of a car horn from the parking lot. Someone was waiting. The real world was calling. Julian dropped his hand, and the loss of his touch was a physical ache. He stood up, running a hand through his damp hair, suddenly looking awkward and out of place. The confident man was gone, replaced by someone who looked as lost as I felt. The storm's passed, he said, his voice strained. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He opened the shed door. Bright, clean light flooded the small space, making me squint. The world outside was washed clean, glistening in green. It smelled new. Everything felt too bright, too loud. He clipped the leash on his Zeus's collar. I did the same for Buster, my hand shaking. The easy intimacy of the darkness had evaporated in the harsh light of day. We were back to being two separate people, standing in a muddy field. Well, he said, clearing his throat and still not looking at me. See you around? And then he was gone. He walked away quickly, his broad back rigid, not once looking back. I stood there, his jacket still around my shoulders, watching him go until he and his dog were just a speck in the distance. The warmth of the jacket felt like a cruel joke. My lips still tingled from his kiss. My heart, which had soared to such impossible heights, plummeted into the cold, muddy ground. See you around. The three most devastating words I had ever heard. The walk back to my car was a blur. The world seemed muted, the colors leached out. I got home, stripped off my wet clothes, and put Julian's jacket on a hanger to dry. It hung in my hallway like a ghost, a silent accusation. I made tea, my hands moving through the familiar motions of my routine, but there was no comfort in it. My carefully ordered world had been cracked open, and I didn't know how to put it back together. The next morning, I woke up with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. The first thought in my head was him. Julian, the kiss, his abrupt departure. I replayed every second of our time in the shed. Had I imagined the tenderness? Had I misread the fear in his eyes as vulnerability? Maybe for him, it was just a moment of shared panic, a strange thing that happened in a storm, something to be forgotten. Maybe he regretted it instantly. The thought was a shard of ice in my chest. I had let him in. For a few brief, stolen moments, I had dismantled my defenses and shown him the person I kept hidden away. And he had walked away. That afternoon, I took Buster to the park. It was a compulsion. I told myself it was for the dog, but I was lying. I scanned the field with a desperate hope that coiled in my gut. He wasn't there. The park felt vast and empty without his presence. The spot where he usually stood seemed like a hole in the fabric of the world. I sat on my bench, the silence I once craved, now feeling oppressive and heavy. It was no longer peace. It was absence. The next day was the same. No Julian, no Zeus. My mind, my greatest enemy, began to spin its terrible narratives. He was avoiding me. He was so disgusted by what happened, by me, that he couldn't even bring himself to come to the place we might cross paths. I had ruined the one public space where I felt a sliver of belonging. Each day the knot in my stomach tightened. My apartment, my sanctuary, began to feel like a prison. Every quiet moment was filled with the memory of his voice, the feel of his hand, the ghost of his kiss. I would catch the scent of his jacket from the hallway, and my heart would ache with a longing so sharp it felt like a physical wound. I was a fool, a lonely, hopeful fool who had mistaken a moment of shared humanity for something more. I had broken my own cardinal rule: never risk the quiet pain of loneliness for the loud, shattering pain of rejection. By the third day, I had resigned myself to the new reality. It was a mistake, a beautiful, terrifying, heartbreaking mistake. I would go back to my routine. I would rebuild my walls stronger and higher this time. I would learn to see the dog park as just a field of grass again, not a stage for a play where I had forgotten all my lines. That evening, my resolve was hardening into a brittle, protective shell. I was making dinner, chopping vegetables with a vicious precision, when the buzzer for my apartment rang. My heart stopped. No one ever buzzed my apartment. My groceries were delivered. My friends, the few I had, always texted first. My hands trembled as I walked to the intercom. "Hello," I said, my voice hoarse. "Now." The sound of his voice, not booming from across a field, but quiet and hesitant through the tinny speaker, sent a shockwave through my entire body. It was Julian. "It's Julian. Can I come up?" I stood frozen, my hand hovering over the button. This was my chance. I could say no. I could pretend I wasn't home. I could protect myself, retreat behind my newly fortified walls. But I remember the feel of his heart beating against my palm. As fast as mine. I pressed the button. The walk from the intercom to my front door was the longest of my life. My mind was a whirlwind of panic and hope. What did he want? To apologize? To tell me to forget it ever happened? To get his jacket back? I opened the door just as he reached the top of the stairs. He looked exhausted. The confident swagger was gone. He was wearing a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, and he looked smaller, more human, than he ever did at the park. He was holding his keys in one hand, gripping them so tightly his knuckles were white. He wasn't looking at me, but at a spot on the floor just past my feet. "Hi," he said, his voice quiet. I manaja." An ocean of awkward silence stretched between us. "I'm sorry," he finally said, looking up, and his eyes were filled with a raw, undisguised vulnerability. "I'm so sorry. The way I left. I'm an idiot." He took a breath. "I panicked," he confessed. Things like that, they don't happen to me. And it was good. It was really good. And that scared the hell out of me. So I ran. It's what I do." Every word was a balm on the raw wound of the last 3 days. He wasn't disgusted. He wasn't indifferent. He was scared, just like me. I was scared too, I whispered. His eyes locked on mine, and I saw a flicker of relief. Can I? He gestured vaguely toward the inside of my apartment. I stepped back, opening the door wider. Come in, he walked into my living room, my space, and it felt both completely strange and completely right. He looked around at my shelves overflowing with books, the half-finished painting on my easel, the worn-out armchair where Buster slept. He was seeing my life, the real one, not the one I performed at the park. You have his jacket, he said, nodding toward the hallway. I washed it, I said, my face heating up. He gave a small, nervous smile. Thanks. He sat on the edge of my couch, perching as if he were ready to bolt at any moment. I sat in the armchair opposite him. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It was a space for thinking, not for hiding. I don't know what I'm doing, Leo, he said, breaking the quiet. He looked down at his hands. I'm not good at this. Feelings. Talking about them. I'm good at laughing and throwing a ball for my dog. That's about it. You were good at it in the shed, I pointed out gently. He looked up, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. I felt like I could tell you things. I haven't felt that in a long time. And then the sun came out, and I remembered that I'm supposed to be the loud, confident guy who doesn't need anyone. And I didn't know how to be that guy, and also be the guy who just kissed you. The honesty was breathtaking. It was a gift. I don't want you to be that guy, I said, my voice gaining strength. I like the guy in the shed. A real smile touched his lips, a small, tired, beautiful thing. Yeah, he said softly. Me too. He stood up and walked over to the window, looking down at the street below. For 3 days, he said, his back to me. I tried to convince myself it was a fluke, a weird storm thing. But I couldn't stop thinking about you, about how quiet your voice was, about how your dog trusts you completely, about how it felt to kiss you. He turned back to face me. I don't know what this is, he said, echoing the fear and uncertainty in my own heart. But I don't want to run away from it anymore. I want to find out. If you do, hope, bright and terrifying, bloomed in my chest. It was a choice again, a chance to step out of the quiet and into the unknown. I stood up and walked toward him, stopping just a few feet away. I do, I said. The relief that washed over his face was so profound it almost buckled him. He closed the remaining distance between us and took my hands in his. His were warm and solid, grounding me. Zeus is in the car, he said, a non sequitur that made perfect sense. He's been miserable. I think he misses Buster. It was an excuse, and we both knew it. Do you want to bring him up? I asked, the question feeling momentous. It was an invitation not just for him, but for his life to enter mine. His smile was blinding. Yeah, I'd like that a lot. And so our new beginning started not with a dramatic declaration, but with the clumsy, joyful reunion of 2 dogs in a small apartment living room. It started with Julian handing me his phone and asking for my number. It started with him staying for dinner, the 2 of us navigating my tiny kitchen, bumping shoulders and laughing. That night, he didn't leave. We lay in my bed, not touching at first, just existing in the same space. The darkness a comfortable friend this time. The anxiety was gone, replaced by a quiet, humming sense of rightness. Eventually, his hand found mine in the space between us, our fingers lacing together. And we slept. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee. I walked into my kitchen to find Julian, wearing a pair of my sweatpants that were far too short on him, standing at my counter, pouring 2 mugs. He smiled when he saw me, a simple, easy smile that lit up his whole face. It wasn't the booming, performative smile from the park. It was just for me. Our days found a new rhythm. We still went to the dog park, but now we stood together, our shoulders brushing, our hands occasionally finding each other to share a brief, secret touch. I learned the stories behind his confidence, a family that expected him to be strong, a career that demanded it. He learned the stories behind my silence, a fear of taking up too much space, a heart that bruised too easily. He brought color and sound to my quiet life. I brought calm and stillness to his loud one. We were 2 halves of a whole we never knew we were missing. My apartment, once a fortress of solitude, became a home, filled with the click of two sets of dog nails on the hardwood floor and the sound of his laughter, which I no longer hated. I loved it. Sometimes I look at him across the living room, reading on the couch with Zeus's head in his lap, and I think about the man I used to see across the dog park. The arrogant, careless stranger. It feels like I'm remembering someone from a different lifetime. It's a humbling reminder that the stories we tell ourselves about other people are almost always wrong, a fiction written by our own fears and assumptions. My life used to be a straight, predictable line, a quiet, orderly narrative I had written for myself. Julian was the plot twist I never saw coming. He, and his goofy, giant dog, and a sudden thunderstorm didn't just disrupt my routine. They dismantled it, tore it down to the foundations, and helped me build something better in its place. Something braver. Something with room for two. It's a life that is still quiet sometimes, but it is never, ever lonely.